All right. Here are some tweets. We can see in the top left, we have a tweet in Urdu, in the Urdu script, which is a Perso-Arabic script. And on the right, top right, we have a tweet in Hindi using the Devanagari script. And in both cases, we have replies written in the same language, but in the Roman script or the Latin script. This writing of Hindi-Urdu in the Latin script is gotten much more popular over the last several decades. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like and a little bit about why that might be. To give some background on Hindi-Urdu, we saw the scripts just now. They look very different. These are languages spoken in India and Pakistan. They're very similar in spoken form, which is why I treat them together. But there's a sociocultural division between them. So which is a religious one. So Hindus overwhelmingly identify as Hindi speakers, and Muslims normally identify as Urdu speakers. And so it's an interesting question, sort of what will happen to that as both languages are written quite a lot in the Roman script. Although it's gotten popular recently, there is a long history of writing Hindi-Urdu in the Roman script. On the left here, I don't know if you can really see that, but that is the oldest example that I found of Hindi-Urdu in the Roman script. If you're familiar with Roman Hindi-Urdu now, that is going to look very strange. Orthographic conventions are very different. That, by the way, is a translation of Aesop's fables into what they called Hindustani, but sort of a mix of Hindi and Urdu, but in the Roman script. Rudyard Kipling, a British Indian writer, also used this. We see here a poem written in English, but some code switching into the into Hindi, written in the Roman script. So this was used during colonization of India and Pakistan, but it never really gained popularity among the native population. So it's really been since the 90s that there's been an explosion of popularity of the Roman script. You might think that's because of technology and because, at least in the beginning, it was much easier to type in the Roman script, but that's not all there is to it, because there are other languages like Greek and other languages where, especially now, with many different keyboards available for computers and mobile devices, the Roman script has actually gotten less popular. In Hindi-Urdu, some studies like this one by Bali et al. have found in some samples of writing online, the vast majority of Hindi was written in the Roman script. And then the other thing that's interesting about it for me is that there are no prescribed spelling rules. And so it's what I'm interested in looking at is what patterns will sort of develop naturally. People aren't taught a particular way to use the Roman script to write Hindi-Urdu. Also, just to show you that this is not only something that's done online. In India and Pakistan, you see lots of storefronts and billboards and so on in the Roman script, in a mixture of Roman script and traditional scripts. And these are two examples. So what I have looked at is I've documented each Hindi-Urdu phoneme and how it's written in the Roman script. And then I consider what sort of considerations seem to shape how these conventions develop. And so today we'll see just a few of my findings, but I think they're a pretty good representation of the kinds of things that I find. So for this study, I used data from X or Twitter. I was able to collect 9,000, 8,900 tweets
It's not possible anymore because it costs $5,000 a month to use their APIs. But this was how many I was able to get before then. And I did some pre-processing, removed proper names and English loan words and non-Hindi-Urdu words, and so on. I also ignored case, which could presumably be used in a meaningful way. But yeah, it's beyond the scope of the study. And then what I did was I took the top 2,000 most frequent words from those tweets, and then I just went through each phoneme and identified the orthographic representations of each one. And then I discuss how these conventions may have come to be. For this last part, Dimitrios Miletis's work was really helpful on the different considerations that can determine what kind of writing system a language will adopt. So I specifically for the different conventions considered to what extent linguistic, psychological, sociocultural, and technological considerations may have affected it. So that was really helpful in grounding this sort of open-ended question of how these conventions came to be. So let's look at a few of my findings now. These are all of the stops and affricates in Hindi-Urdu. There are 38 or 39 of them, depending on the dialect. So that's a lot more than we have in English and a lot more than you might think can be represented uniquely in the Roman script. So we have voiced and voiceless consonants. We have aspirated and breathy voiced consonants, and we have geminate or long consonants. What I found is actually that there is a very elegant system for representing these. There are a few exceptions, which I will discuss. But generally, this is how the system works. You start with the combination of place and articulation and voicing. Sorry. So those symbols you see in the first line, you'd pronounce them as in English, b, p, d, t, j, ch, g, k. If it's a long consonant, you repeat the character. If it's breathy or aspirated, you add an H at the end. Not all of these are attested in my data. Some are rare. But of the ones that are attested, this convention is remarkably consistent. And just as an example, you see a tweet at the bottom. You have that BH, that breathy B, written using BH, and then the other consonants like B, G, just singleton unaspirated consonants, which are written just with a single grapheme. By the way, some people have asked what kind of what the data set, what the tweets look like. There's a lot of hate speech. It was very difficult to come up with examples that were appropriate for this presentation. Another question. Yeah, so there we see a remarkable amount of consistency in graphing the phoneme representations. We might also ask how dialectal variation is represented in the Roman script, and this could be a sociocultural question. It could also be about how people perceive their own speech. I like this example. I think this example is also kind of elegant because the ch and r
are often, this is a case of overlap, but they're often written using the same way as we write the aspirated k and the breathy g. So normally ch would be written with kh and r would be written with gh. But a lot of speakers pronounce this ch as the aspirated k, but the r as the g. So hopefully that makes sense. But there's this sort of asymmetry there, where if dialectal if dialectal variation is represented here, then we should see that then ch should never be represented by k, because that's by k, because that's never how it's pronounced. But r should be represented sometimes by g, because that is how it's pronounced by some speakers, and that is in fact what we see. So it'll take some empirical studies to understand exactly why that is, but it seems like we do have examples of dialectal variation being represented in this script. A few cases where this consistency of grapheme to phoneme representations seems to break down. One is that rarer phonemes are more likely to share orthographic representations with other phonemes. And one example of that is the retroflex and dental stop, so that the seems to be pronounced the same as, or seems to be written the same as the, and that seems to be because the retroflex stops are much rarer than, in Hindi-Urdu than the dental stops. This is not really a psycholinguistic paper, but we can speculate that the processing is easier. There is sort of less ambiguity created when one of the sets of phonemes is rare, and that means that way you don't have to select a whole new set of graphemes to represent these additional phonemes. So they share these sounds. It's not in the table, but vocal is on the slide. But these sounds share the T and D. Also, going back to that example again of stops and affricates, once the representations get long, the consistency also seems to break down. Here we have ch, the affricate. When you have phonemes that would be represented with CH, or CCH, or CH, or CHH, now there starts to be some overlap, and you start to see the same phoneme represented in the data by multiple orthographic representations. This may also be a psychological thing, with longer representations being more difficult either to read or to write, but potentially some empirical studies could determine why. So to summarize, my major findings, most of them are represented by the sampling of data that I just showed you. So throughout my data, there was actually a remarkable consistency of grapheme to phoneme correspondences. This could be because it could be that they somehow follow the original conventions that were developed. It also could just be, and in fact, I think there is evidence elsewhere in the data that there is a sort of tendency towards having a one-to-one grapheme to phoneme representation. That seems to be preferred. We also see dialectal variation represented throughout the data. We see that with the rarer phonemes and longer orthographic representations, we can see more ambiguity. I didn't talk about the last two too much, but there is some influence of the early Roman Hindi-Urdu work, even though, as I said, there have been a lot of changes too. And also, no diacritics are used. So that's a technological consideration of choosing what is easiest to type. So we've seen linguistic, psychological, and technological considerations here. Possibly sociocultural considerations as well, with showing that dialect variation. I hope to do more studies on sociocultural considerations here. In particular, I mentioned that there is a big sociocultural divide between Hindi and Urdu. So it would be interesting to see how that divide is expressed when Hindi and Urdu speakers are writing in the same script. And also, I'd like to find out more about how people feel about the Roman script and why, get more at why it is that the Roman script is used. We talked about colonization and the history of it, but it seems like there would be more to it than that. And finally, I hope that for such a broadly used writing system, that this sort of forms a foundation, this documenting of the orthographic representations forms a foundation for future work on this writing system. And yeah, also the final thing is interesting to see how a writing system like this has developed organically. My references are here. Thanks very much.
I have a question about, or a bunch of questions. One about the differences across mediums.
Mhm.
How it would be different in like posting a tweet versus texting someone? Are they more likely to use the Roman script in one and the Hindi script in the other? That's a good question. That's harder to find though, because tweets are easily accessible, but hard to extrapolate from text. But I think there could be a shift there of how easy it is, and then how different ages are interacting with it. Because I feel like younger users are going to be a lot more perceptive to a new writing system being adopted, like in a lot of language variation changes. And then the last thing, my question is use of abbreviation in these tweets, because we see that a lot in other languages using Roman script. I don't know how it is in Hindi, if there's like an easy way to use abbreviations using the script, but I feel like that would also be interesting.
Yeah, let's see if I can remember all of those.
Yeah, sorry.
So
medium, ages, and abbreviation.
Okay, so texting, yes, we do see it a lot in texting. There are also Hindi, Urdu, or Hinglish predictive keyboards that you'll find on the iPhone and Android devices. I don't know how I don't think there are any studies on how the frequency compares to tweets, but it is frequent in both cases. In terms of age, I really don't know. We don't have any, I don't have any demographic data on these users. English language education does have a long history in India and Pakistan, but like I said, it's only really gained popularity since the 90s. So there probably is an age effect to some degree, but I'm just speculating. Abbreviations, there are abbreviations. Abbreviations often consist of losing vowels, which is interesting because both the Urdu script is an abjad, the Hindi script is an abugida. Neither of them are alphabets. Both of them have do funny things with vowels. So it seems like for very common words, people sort of reflect those scripts in how they make abbreviations.
This question is also so much less so interesting. And then he had the same conventions for KH and GH in Farsi and also in Arabic too. Do you know, do you have any idea where these conventions are forming, when, and how? Because these are completely different languages, but they use the same convention.
Yeah, I don't know where they came from. Do you know if does the Farsi script use those conventions?
Sorry?
Does the Farsi script use those conventions?
Yeah, for example, even before digital devices, I remember people for transcribing like Farsi, they use like KH for fair, GH for fair. I heard there kind of that, I don't know, or something, there was a convention the last team of Iran made for transcription. It was like academia that they tried to establish kind of convention for these. But I'm not sure at all if this
So, yeah, okay. I ask because in the traditional Urdu script, that is how you represent aspiration and breathy voice. You have the Arabic word or the Arabic character for ha for the H, and you in Urdu, if you want to write those sounds, you write the stop like T or D or G, and then follow it with the H sound. I don't know where that comes from. I guess as a phonologist, I could say that, you know, that is sort of what you're doing when you say those sounds, right? You're adding some more breath. You're adding an H-like sound to them. But I don't know if that's where it comes from, but it may have come from the Urdu script into Roman Hindi-Urdu, but that's interesting that Farsi has the same convention. Yes.
I'm coming from a type design perspective, and I've heard many times that in Pakistan, people are very strongly have a very strong preference for the Nasaliq writing style. So much so that even newspapers, like online editions of daily newspapers, use images rather than using fonts. Would you say that that is obsolete now? What you're showing seems to suggest the opposite.
I am not too familiar with like what people do in Pakistan and what conventions there are, but there definitely, I think it's safe to say there is a lot of writing in the Roman script in Pakistan. There might also be a lot. I'm sure like formal writing is still done in the Nastaliq script.
I have one last question by Amalia. So she says, I think there's an effect on what is available in the typical values of the Roman script, which does not distinguish dentals and retroflexes. This might be more important than the rarity of retroflexes. What do you think about this?
Well, it's just that there are a lot of sounds which are not reflected in the Roman script, like the breathy voiced stops. And the aspiration contrast, which still have a way of being reflected in the Roman script. Also, my understanding is that in Dravidian languages, you do make the distinction in the Roman script. So definitely, like the letters available in the Roman script has something to do with it. But that doesn't seem like the whole story to me.
Okay, thank you. So there are no questions, but we run out of time. So thank you very much.